Jack Dunbar, welcome.
Hi, Brock.
So great catching up with you again. I've never actually got to spend a ton of time with you like I hoped I would. You and I served on the board together for CGDC for a while, and we've chatted a little bit at the conferences, but never got to really just sit down and dig in with you. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Cool. Yeah, me too. Same thing. I feel like we were both like serving, and this
Yeah.
sometimes happens. I think in ministry where you like serve side by side with somebody who you don't know deeply, and it's like, man, I like that guy. I would like to know that person more. But you're just kind of like there's a worship leader at my church that's kind of like that. It's like, man, I really like this person, but like it's just he has a busy life, 3 kids. I have a busy life, and it's just like it's never really happened that we've had a ton of really intentional time together. And
Yeah.
um, so yeah, likewise, man. I'm looking forward to chatting this morning.
Awesome. So I guess let's just dig in. What's your relationship with games?
So games for me have always been an excuse to spend time with people.
Mm,
I mean, that's like what they are.
yeah.
And that's kind of how I've oriented all of the like chosen hobbies in my life. I guess I'm just like I grew up living on a lake, which is like a charmed life,
Oh, yeah.
Like my parents just like provided for me. They're very like hospitable to others, like very good parents to me. Um, but also I like lived out in the country in a small town with like 5,000 people,
Mm,
and I was an only child, and my parents were older because like I uh, um, I was a product of a lot of like failed pregnancies. Like my parents were
oh,
very
wow.
concerned that they weren't going to have any children.
Mm,
And actually, my mom had been told like, "You will not have children," And then I was born, and so I was like, my parents were a little bit older. We lived kind of out in the
mm,
country in the small town, and I was an only child. But despite that, like I've always been a big like extrovert. I've just like
mm.
loved being around people, and you know, only children are kind of weird hybrids. Like you're not oldest. You kind of behave like a youngest.
Yeah.
You like, you have to be an introvert because you're forced to be. So, and I think that was a really hard like identity thing for me was like, I was like, I kind of behaved like an introvert for much of my life. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I realized like, man, I don't just like people and want to be around people. Like I need that social engagement.
Mm,
And it was kind of like a big identity shift for me as a teenager to be like, whoa, I'm like a social guy.
yeah.
And that's like, especially once I became a Christian, it's like, oh, because my parents were great, but like I didn't grow up with Christian values or like in a Christian home,
Mm,
really. Especially my dad. Like my mom had a Catholic background, and so she like would, you know, occasionally share like principles and stuff. And
mhm.
I think definitely had a mindset of following like the morality of Jesus,
Sure.
and occasionally would like teach those things to me.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't have any sense of like the gospel, any like saving faith, or certainly no like practices in my life that were in
Mm,
any way devotional. No prayer, no scripture. And so um, when I became a Christian when I was 16, which was through a Young Life camp,
oh, cool.
uh, that just opened up it, the presentation of the gospel to me really opened something up for me where it was like, oh, like the narrative that I have accepted for what life is not
Mhm.
necessarily true. Um, and created a bunch of, I think anybody who becomes a Christian at a stage of life where you've already formed some ideas,
Mhm.
um, it's a blessing and it's a curse because like it takes a long time to reform those ideas.
Yeah, sure.
But it's also, you know, it's like uh, your faith is so radical because of that, where you're like, whoa, like I've been thinking about things wrong, and like I'm like
Mm,
mostly an adult. and then you start to like reform ideas. And one of those things was like my idea about myself, like who I am, what like what life is, and realizing that I was made with intention, like that somebody cared to like craft me to
Yeah.
be for something, um, was very different than what I thought about life. And so like that came with all kinds of realizations where it's like, whoa, like, you know, everyone's always told me I'm an introvert because I like read a lot and spend a lot of time alone. And it's like, no, it's just like what I had to do.
Mhm.
And I started to look at my life and I'm like, well, wait a minute. I have friends at my house every weekend. Like, I was like, yeah, come over. And that's where games come in, is like,
Mm.
man, like during the summer, it was easy because I had a lake at
Yeah.
my house. So like I could always get people to come over. It was like, yeah, come spend time with me. I'm super bored and lonely. And then like during the winter and like fall and spring and stuff, it's like, let's just, you know, play video games all weekend,
Mm.
or let's play board games. And, you know, I would like I said, those things were always just an excuse to be with people.
Yeah.
Um, it was like, oh, you also like Pokemon cards? Cool. I have a whole bunch of them. Let's like figure out how to play it. And yeah, like, yeah, I'll trade you anything you want. You know, I don't care. I like you. I want to be friends with you. So I would, you know, when I was a little kid, it was like trading collectible cards. Like that was a big thing
Mm-hmm.
with me and my friends. And then as we got a little bit older, it was playing like Risk and Monopoly, you know, classic board games. The really big shift for me in like hobby board games, and when I really got into like modern board games,
Mm-hmm.
was I had a friend in high school who was still a big board gamer, and really kind of got me into the hobby. And also one of the reasons that I think I am so dedicated to the board game hobby is because of this friend.
Mm.
He was kind of like a quiet guy. I really like him. Um, and he was just super into, he loved playing Risk. And
Nice.
he was like, hey, I saw this thing on the internet that is like Risk in space. I'm like, Risk in space, cool. And it was called Risk 2210 AD, by Avalon Hill. And man, he and I and two of my other friends played that game like every weekend for like a whole year of high school.
No.
It just like really like cemented our like friendships, and
Yep.
it just became like a huge piece of life. And like to this day, I think like I am friends with this person because of this thing. Like this thing
Mm.
facilitated a
Yeah.
friendship with a person I otherwise wouldn't have been able to connect with, because it's just so reserved and quiet, but like such a good friend.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so when I think of games, that's always what I think of. I think of the people, I think of the connection. I think of sort of like um, that shift from like, you know, being an introverted kid with like kind of like nerdy hobbies and interests, and like using that as a tool to engage with people.
Yeah.
And yeah, so long story short, that's my gaming sort of history. That's also kind of like tied to my testimony.
Yeah. Yeah. I really resonate with that. I grew up in a small town, kind of an only child. There's 16 years between me and my sister, so she was out of the house pretty early in my life, and um, yeah, we lived a mile outside of town, and I just remember being lonely sometimes and just wanting to go in town, asking my parents to go in town because the kids in town could like go play with each other and run around town and stuff, and so.
It's funny, like I lived down a gravel hill. So like one of the
Mhm.
things my friends were always talking about at school was like riding bikes. And I'm like, I didn't learn to ride a bike till I was like 11. Because I'm like, where am I going to ride a bike out here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my bike stayed at my grandma's house in town, so yeah, there was this uh nasty steep hill kind of by our house, so.
Yeah. So that's funny.
So,
Um,
after high school, did you keep playing games?
yeah. So, you know, college, I was always a very serious student. I mean, I think that was something that like both my parents instilled in me. Like my dad was just really big on work ethic, and my mom was like really big on like excellence. Like for her, it was like, it's immoral to not do your best, kind of was like
Mm-hmm.
the lesson that I learned, I suppose. And so I like just always strove very hard in school. So all that to say, like the narrative of my life was like, you must do well. So when I went to college, I was like very dedicated to studies. I was like, I don't know, I was like Spartan-esque almost. Like other kids are like, we're partying this weekend. I'm like, I am studying this weekend. You know, like like you guys go ahead and be children or whatever. So I just had this like mindset that was like, no, I must like get straight A's and so yeah, so in college I just like, I don't know, didn't have as fun as
Mm.
like some other people have in college. I
Yeah.
did, you know, but I just kind of like was very dedicated. I played a lot of like solo video games. Like Skyrim came out,
Yeah.
I think when I was a junior in college, and that was like, I was like, I went to class, I played Skyrim, I like chatted with some friends at the coffee shop every once in a while, and played on an ultimate frisbee league, and went to the gym, and like that. I think that pretty much summarizes my junior year of college. Like it was like that's all that happened. Um, and but one fun thing that happened in college related to games is sophomore year. I lived in a really weird situation. This is how like college dorms work at Christian colleges, where it's like we lived in a quad, and it
Yep.
was like the size of my 10 by 10 office I'm sitting in right now. And I'm like, oh, how did they stuff 4 adult men into like a 15 by 15 room with 4 bunk beds and charge us $11,000 a year? Like, I'm just like, dude, that's crazy.
What school
But
did
anyway,
you go to?
I went to a school called Whitworth.
Mm.
So Whitworth University up in Spokane. It's a great school. So the reason that I went there is I was between that and going to UW because I live in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
So University of Washington is like, you know, prestigious
Yeah.
school. Like it had a good honors program. I really wanted to be a doctor when I went to college. Like
Oh wow.
I was very interested in being a physician. They have a good medical program at the University of Washington. And I this I think is the first time I really felt like a leading of the Holy Spirit. I was registering for college, and I talked with my parents a lot about it, and I was like, "Yep, it's going to be UW, you know, no question." But I went to Whitworth, and it was one of the few Christian schools that I looked at. But it was in town. It was in Spokane, where
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a small town called Medical Lake, but Spokane was the city nearby. It's like 30 minutes away.
Yeah.
And Whitworth was like also a very good school, like academically excellent, but also very faith oriented.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Presbyterian school. And one of the things I really liked about it, because I was a new Christian, I was like only like a year and a half into my faith. And when you're a teenager, like it's hard to take something seriously that you've like just started.
Yeah.
So like I knew it was important. Like I knew that I'd made a life altering decision, and I could already feel God working in my life and changing things about me. But I wasn't very intentional, you know, as
Mm-hmm.
a kid. So I was like, you know, I kind of went there and I was like, this is cool. Like I stayed overnight. I was like, this feels different than the other schools I've stayed at. Like stayed at the state schools, and everybody was like how I actually acted in college, where it's like, you know, they were serious and they were getting a job and stuff. And like the students I stayed with at Whitworth were like intentional with each other. They were like engaged in community. They like loved one another. You know, I could like see it. I was like, whoa, this is visibly different. And so I was sitting at my computer registering for school. I was like signing up for my freshman year. And I was like, I know I told my parents UW I'm going to go to Whitworth. And I just filled out the thing for Whitworth. And I went downstairs because the computer was upstairs in our house, and came downstairs and I was like, hey, I registered for college. I registered at Whitworth. And my parents were like, what? You said UW. And I'm like, I know. I just want to go to Whitworth. And my mom was very happy because I was going to be closer and she wouldn't have to drive to Seattle. So she was actually very, very happy about that. My dad was puzzled. He's like, "What are you thinking? Like, why would you, why?" And I was like, "Well, Dad, it's just important for my faith. I know that as an adult, I'm going to have to pick what I'm about, and I want my faith to be an important part of that." He didn't get it. And I was like, it doesn't matter if you get it, it's just, that's what I'm going to do. And he respected that. So, anyway, the question was, how did games come into your life? And my sophomore year, we lived in this quad, and that's when we went home one weekend and all discovered our Pokemon cards, and we're like, let's I wonder if anybody else has Pokemon cards. And we're all 20-year-old guys who grew up and were born in 1991, so like everybody had Pokemon cards. So we our whole dorm floor had gone back for fall break and brought home our Pokemon cards. We set up Pokemon tournaments in the dorm, and that was an experience that showed me because I had that intention now of I know that God is using me for something. But that was the first time that I saw an experience of whoa, it's cool what cardboard can do.
Yeah. Hey, did they let you move around your furniture? I went to a Christian school as well. So what we did, a whole bunch of us, 12 of us, all joined together and made an arrangement where we made different rooms. So we took all the beds and shoved 12 people in one room, and then we made a computer room and then a hangout room and a closet room.
Yeah.
Did they let you do anything like that?
Yeah, they didn't like you to move the beds. The beds were supposed to stay there. But we would move stuff around all the time, and it kind of depended on your RA.
Yeah.
That year we had a ton of fun because our RA was younger than us. He was a freshman. I don't know. Actually, I don't know how that. No, his thing was he was a sophomore like we were, because it was our sophomore year of college. But he was a year younger than us because he had skipped a grade in school. So he had this kind of yeah, guys, whatever you want to do, let's do that. That'll be fun. And so we had a ton of fun that year. He would, kind of okay, just don't tell anybody else. we would do stuff like that. Yeah, we had we definitely had designated zones. We would go here for this thing, and then to so-and-so's room for that. And it was fun going to a Christian college.
Yeah. When did you change your mind about becoming a doctor?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. It actually happened pretty slowly. I finished college. I have a bachelor's degree in biology. And it was my senior year. I was studying for the MCAT, and I was thinking about specialty, because you always have to think a step ahead with those kind of careers. It's not just am I going to go to college? It's what am I going to do 10 years from now when I'm done with college? What kind of residencies do I want to be working for and stuff like that. And I had worked as an EMT in college, so I had done emergency medicine, and I kind of liked the fast pace of it and stuff, but I didn't like the patient handoff. For me, I really wanted to do something that was more people oriented. And that was kind of my desire with medicine, was I was always super drawn to Jesus's healing stories. Reading the Gospels and just watching him heal people. I just thought man, it would be really cool to get involved in that kind of ministry. I saw medicine as being the way to do that. And I don't know, I just felt some kinship with that idea, I guess. Kind of felt a calling in that direction or something. And you know, when you're young, you think like there are like 5 jobs. It's like, I'll be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, you know, a business guy, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you kind of like, your options are so limited in what you think is possible. So I just kind of stayed on that path. I liked science. I was good at science. My biology teacher in high school was like, you need to do science. Like, the other kids are not as good as you, you know? And she was just like, you know, I have to tell you the truth. Like, if you're like, if you're curious what you should do this, because not everyone wants to or can and stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it kind of, she was like the most forceful person in high school. Like, my English teacher was like my closest friend, you know, teacher wise, but she was like, do whatever you want. And I'm like, no, tell me what to do. But Lisa wasn't afraid to do that. She's just like, study science in college. I'm like, okay. so I kind of just took that like, wow, she believes in me. That's cool. Okay, I'll do that. So that was a huge reason why I went that direction in the first place. Like, I was a, you know, young kid, and I'm like, oh, I'm kind of good at this. Sure, I'll do that. And I liked it. I really liked science, and I liked doing emergency medicine, but I was like, this isn't it. There's not enough like patient to patient or like patient doctor interaction here. We got to do something besides this. So I shadowed a couple of doctors my senior year. I spent a lot of time in a family practice clinic with a doctor I really respect, who's a Christian. He was actually my childhood doctor. So I knew him pretty well already. And like, we got to know each other super well because I spent all of my winter break with him. So I spent 2 weeks in the clinic every day working with him. And he met with me after the experience and was like, you can do this if you want. And I'm like, oh, sweet. And he's like, yeah, you'll be fine. But do you want to? And I was like, do you think I don't? he's like, well, I've seen your personality, and I don't know if you'll love this. And like, that was the first time anybody had talked to me about the intersection of like personhood and career. It was like, I never thought about like, well, who you are as a person and what your career is. Like, you know, I never, like, they talked a lot about that at Whitworth, like vocation. It's like, it's not about what you do for money. It's about what you do to fulfill your calling for God. And I'm like, yep. Yeah. Medicine and doctor. Like, that's what I'm supposed to do, you know? Great. And this guy was like, it doesn't have to be that. Like, you're 22, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, well, I think this is what I want to do. And he was like, well, tell me about some of the other things you want out of life. Like, what do you want your marriage and your family to look like? And I was like, I don't know, healthy and good and godly. And he's like, I mean, yeah, you can do that. And he's like, do you want to like get married now after medical school? Like, because it's kind of that. It's like, you do it now or after medical school, you know, like when you're 20 or when you're 30. Those are kind of the options. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, probably more like now-ish. I don't know. And he's like, okay, just think about it. Like, think about if this is really what you want. Like, it's just he's like, honestly, when I went, because he was in his 60s, he's like, I'm getting ready to retire. If I was in your shoes now, I don't know if I would choose medicine. But when I went to school, you know, sure, I'm glad I did. It's been a great career. He's like, it's going to be totally different for your generation. There's going to be all kinds of technological advances, changes to insurance. He's like, he's like, when I started this job, it was amazing. I would sit down, I would get to know people's lives intimately. He's like, now I see people for 10 minutes at a time. I give them antibiotics because they've come back the 4th time to see me. And, you know, now I'm allowed to. And, you know, then we battle back and forth about what their insurance will cover. He's like, it's not, he's like, you talk about ministry. He's like, maybe you should do that.
Huh.
And I was like, oh. He's like, because the ministry is gone in medicine. This is a technical job. And I was like, oh. And then I had a surgeon. I shadowed a surgeon, and he let me like play with the surgery robot and like assist him. I probably shouldn't even say that. He like let me do things. I'm like, should I be doing this? He was just a cool guy. He's a Christian guy as well. And he was like, yeah. So it's saying, I mean, we sat down and I just shouted with him for 2 days in the OR. He's like, you seem like a good kid. Like, you could do this, you know? I'm like, okay. He's like, do you want to do this? I'm like, what is with you doctors? Like, why are you doing this to me? Yes, like, it's cool. He's like, it's not just about it being cool. It's about it being extremely hard. Huh. And he's like, you seem like a social person. Like, this is a cruel job. I was like, oh. He's like, yeah. Like, he's like, you're going to get in here and like, it's a technical job. And they kept mentioning this, like, and I was like, it just kind of really shook me up. It was over my winter break, you know, that I was doing all of this intensive investigation. And then I went back and had what's called a Jan term. And actually I met up with that surgeon in Jan term. It was January. So we had this like 4-week break between semesters at Whitworth where you could study anything. And I took a basketball class my senior year because I was super far ahead on credits. And I was trying to just kind of like, you know, figure life out a little bit. And so I had one class every day. It was 8 to 9 a.m. It was basketball. And the rest of my day was like, do whatever you want. So I was like, I'm going to use this time to study for the MCAT. And I spent most of it reeling, like soul searching. Because I'm like, do I even want to do this? Like, I spent 3.5 years preparing for this, and now I'm not sure it's even what I want, you know? And so I didn't do well on the MCAT because I was like so distracted by this thing. And I'm like, am I going to retake this? Like, do I want to study for something? Like, what, you know, it just like totally shook me my senior year. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I need to just pray about this, really like discern if this is what I'm going to do. And so I got to the spring of my senior year, and my research advisor, who had done like microbiology research with, was like, are you not going to medical school? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, do you want to work here? I was like, at Whitworth? He's like, yeah, I need a lab instructor because they had built this new science building and it was like $14 million. It's a beautiful building. We had just moved into it my senior year. So like my senior year as a science student, we got this brand new building with labs and stuff. I got to use the microbiology lab. I was the first student to ever do research there. And I was like, sweet, cool. This is so cool. But yeah, he was always on me about like, don't go to medical school, get a PhD in science, like change the world, you know? And it was his big thing. He's like, why don't you stay? Like really think about it. I want you to do research eventually in your life. So just stay here and work for us. We need more lab instructors because we're getting more enrollment. And I had taught this, like, I taught these classes for students who were like first year biology students to help them like study. And so they knew I had some teaching ability, and they essentially just said like, I did an interview with the dean, and she was like, oh, Jack, you want to do this? Okay. You know, great. You get the job. Like she didn't even ask me any questions. She just like knew who I was. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, thanks, Frank. And he's like, no problem. So I stayed on for 2 years and taught intro biology labs at the school. And while I was doing that, that was a big like soul searching for me. Cause I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, what does God actually want for me? You know? And it was kind of getting back to those questions of like, how has God made me? Like, what did he uniquely craft me to do? And I really like the teaching element. I was still drawn to the healer stories of Jesus. But I was also just really drawn to scripture. Like I just studied a lot. I was doing ministry. I was leading young life club, a young life club in town, and I just loved seeing people get baptized. Like I would, every time that happened at church, or like around me in my life, I would always like weep. I just like was so interested in people coming to know Jesus. And I just like had a realization where I'm like, why don't I just do ministry? Like if I want to see people healed, like why don't I do that? And it coincided with this really great experience I had volunteering at the hospital. I started volunteering in oncology on the cancer unit. And I thought maybe this is what I'll do. Maybe this could be like a more caring medical profession. And I shadowed the oncologist there, and she was a really nice lady. But she like didn't spend any time with patients either. She kind of like went in and read test results. She was a scientist more than, a caring professional. And the nurses were very caring. They'd like come in and help the patients, and they'd be like, okay, Jack's going to just sit with you while you do chemo. And that was like mostly what I volunteered to do, was sit. And so I'd just sit in these big chairs while people were on chemo drips, and they'd be like, extremely sick. And their family would like come in sometimes, and they would leave because they're busy. They're like going to work. So like, and I would just sit with people. I did this like 2 days a week, and I would chat with them about life. And this was when I really realized like, oh, I want to like do this. Like I want to do like intentional conversations with people. And like, so I started looking into like, what kind of jobs do that? I started looking into like counseling, like mental health counseling, and getting a master's degree in theology so I could go on to be a pastor. And the doors closed on counseling. Like it was just obvious, like God didn't want me doing that.
Huh.
Like I got into the program, and like the advisors of the program and stuff were very like, yeah, come do this. But like financial aid was, I had this weird phone call. I had a meeting set up to go meet with the advisor of the theology program. And then I had a financial like aid call for this counseling program. And this is sometimes I think where like, if we're not careful, we can miss God's leading in our life. Like I was talking to her, and she's like, hey, congratulations on getting into our mental health counseling program. What are your plans financially? I told her like, I want to debt finance this. I don't have any money, so I'm just going to, take loans. She's like, really? I was like, isn't that how people go to college? And she's like, well, yes, but like, this is an expensive program. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I know. And she's like, let me just do some math for you really quick. And she was like, here's the average counselor's salary. Here's what you're paying. What you're looking at in our economy is basically taking on a second mortgage for potentially 20 years. Wow. Like if you go out and you get a house, like your monthly budget is you're going to be struggling for a long time in this profession. And I was like, are you supposed to have these conversations with people? And she's like, just think about it. Like, consider if there's other ways you can pay. Hung up the phone and was like, that was super discouraging. I'm like, well, I'm late for this meeting. So I went over to talk to the theology advisor, and he was like, good news, Jack, you can do this for free. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's great. And he's like, yeah, you're a full-time employee at Whitworth. Like, why not? And I was like, well, I just got into this counseling program. And he's like, ministry is counseling. It's the same thing. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, yeah, I mean, you're not going to do like diagnostic counseling, but like you can take our counseling class. You can like, if you end up a pastor, like that's one of the gifts that Paul emphasizes, is listening. And, so he basically let me he was like, yeah, I walked, he's like, so should we sign up? And I'm like, I guess. Yeah. So I like signed up that day for a master's in theology, and I showed up to the first class, and I was like, I was sitting in the very front, and the guy's like, why are you here? He's like, that's a question for everybody. So why are you here? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I signed up for this. It's free. I guess God wants me to be a pastor. So I don't know. I mean, that's what happened. It was just like, it's just like God was like, no, no, yes, go do that. I'm like, okay.
That's wild. Do you remember how your instructor responded to that?
He was like, well, he's a funny guy. He's very big on like, he's a Presbyterian guy, but his theology is very like Bartian, based on Karl Barth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so he's like, hey, whatever Jesus wants to do with you is the right thing. And then he moved on to the next thing.
What, 2 years to get your master's?
Yeah. So on average, that was like 3 years.
Or 3 years?
But because I was young and single, and I worked at the school anyway, I doubled up on classes, and I went quickly through it. And then I also added language onto it. So I took, I didn't take Greek, but I did take Hebrew. So I took 2 years of Hebrew. So I ended up finishing the master's early at 2 years. Yeah, because like that program was designed for working professionals and like people who are actively doing ministry. So like the classes were like confined to like very intensive weekends, and then like week-long things where like people would take a week off of work and they would go and do school. So it was a cool program because I had a lot of people who were like, you know, from all different walks of life. Like some of them were like professionals who were trying to, they just wanted to know theology so they could bring it into their businesses. And some of them were like, I'm actively, like my friend who I ended up working on his church plant with was like, I just planted a church. I have a baby. I'm just like trying to get some extra learning, you know, like I need to be better. So, and I met him on like the second class that I had, and he was like, do you want to preach? And I'm like, me? I don't know. He's like, I need a break. Come preach in my church. I'm like, okay. So I started like guest preaching for him. And like a year later, I ended up, when I finished my master's, I ended up pastoring with him. So
how many years did you pastor with him?
Well, I still am. I started off at that church. I walked in on a Sunday, and he was like, it was after I'd finished my master's. I was working for a business in town. After I finished working, I finished working at the school. They had hired a permanent replacement who had like an actual degree in lab science, like master's degree in science. And so they had replaced me at that job, and I'd finished my master's. So I was like, okay. I just went to work for a small business in town that was an Amazon seller. And I was like, I guess I'll do the bivocational ministry thing. I'll just wait and see what God wants me to do. And I went into Pacific Keep one weekend, and Boris was like, Jack, let's have lunch. And I had lunch with him, and he's like, I have a job for you. It has no pay or benefits, but it's ministry, and it's all the time. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, don't quit sitting on your hands. Be a pastor. Come join me. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I just was like, okay, you know, I'm young, I'm single, but like, this is what I want to do. So, so I started serving there when I was 25. Now I'm 33. So it's been about 8 years. The first 5 years, I was bivocational. So I worked full time in business. And then I did ministry on the nights and weekends. I was like, Pastor Batman. So, and then I started a small group with guys at my business. Like I like slowly found out who the Christians were, and I'm like, hey, let's have lunch together. And we'd like talk about Jesus outside. I'm like, oh, cool, I'm doing ministry. Then we would, do our Amazon job. So did that for about 5 years. I worked for that company for 3, and then another one, and then I went to work for the church for 2 years. Um, I did that for full time for 2 years. Then we ran out of money, and I started working with a guy who I met through a guy I was discipling. So I ran into one of my old students in the park, and he was like, "Jack?" I'm like, "Matt." I'm like, "I know your name is Matt, but I don't remember you at all." He's like, "Yeah, I played football at Whitworth. I was like in your biology class." I'm like, "Oh, cool." And he was like, "Hey, I heard you're a pastor now. I want to become a Christian." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Let's go hang out." And we like went down to the pizza place and talked for hours about his faith and why he's interested in following Jesus. And I was like, "Yeah, come to church on Sunday." And he started coming, and this was like right when I started full time. And so I walked with him through that couple of years while I was working full time, and he got baptized. And he brought a guy to church like that spring that I was leaving full time. And like we were really struggling with our budget at church. And I'm like, I don't know what we're going to do. It was like kind of post COVID. We were meeting, but like people weren't coming. You know, it was like we had prior had like 100 people, and now we were down to like 40 who were coming to church regularly. And it was great. Like I loved that. I liked the small community church thing, but I was just like, I don't know what we're going to do. And like Boris and I were both full time and on staff. And I'm like, well, we can't. He's like, maybe we both go down to, I'm like, no, you should stay. Like we should protect you. We should keep you in minute. Like you're the lead. I'll step out. I'll find something to do. I've worked before bivocational. I can do it again. So this was happening, and my friend Matt, who had been discipling, brought this guy to church. And I was like, wow, this guy's great. I really like him. And he's like, me too. I just met him at a banquet. I'm like, oh. And he's like, yeah, let's hang out with him and see if, you know, how he's doing and stuff. And I got to know him. And as I was kind of working towards this like exit from full time, he had started an accounting business. And I just happened to have coffee with him after the board meeting where we finally voted like, yes, okay, Jack's gonna reduce his pay. He's gonna go find a job, and we'll, you know, it's gonna be okay. Don't worry. Like we'll figure it out. We'll keep the church together. Like we're not gonna close our doors or anything like that. And we had some really cool things happening because like that war in Ukraine had broken out, and our congregation was like mostly Ukrainian. So we had an opportunity to serve refugees who were like spilling into the city. And I was like, Boris needs to stay and like keep doing what he's doing. And I'll support, like I'm not going anywhere. And so I continued on preaching and serving and leading and stuff. And I was meeting with Seth, and I was like, yeah, how's your business going? And he's like, it's crazy. It's too busy. I have too much to do. I can't do it. And I'm like, oh, yeah. He's like, how's work going for you? And I'm like, well, I'm leaving. I like need to find a job. And he's like, come work for me. I need you. And I was like, well, I don't know accounting. And he's like, I'll teach you. It's easy. Just come help me. I need a pastor. I need somebody with like character. And I was like, oh, okay. So I just started doing accounting. I've been doing that for the last 2 years.
It's funny hearing you recount all your history here. You have a lot of people telling you what you should do, and they need you. And
yeah, I just try to be aware and then obedient, and just like, okay.
Yeah. You sound like a very go with the flow, just kind of open to whatever God has. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's why like when I started New Kingdom Gaming, that was like one of the few things where I chose to do it. Like I was like, I love this. I love board games. I see the ministry opportunity here. It just totally aligns with my own desires.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to do that. And
did you also pray about it or anything, or you just kind of like,
okay. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it wasn't like flippant. It was like,
well, I just didn't
very like,
I didn't mean flippant, but like, sometimes you just kind of know, like, you don't even have to like pray about it, or at least sometimes in your spirit, you're just like, yeah, this is, I don't know. There's no, at least for me, I've had some moments like that.
Well, one of the things for me is like, I made that discovery about myself. I'm an extrovert,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like, I have most often heard the words of God through others,
Mm.
I feel. And so, like, I'll be praying, like, God, send me a sign or show me what to do
Yeah.
or tell me the next thing. And then somebody will tell me the next thing. And I'm like, okay, well, I was literally praying about that today. And then here you are telling me, a Christian brother, to do this. Like, I mean, that's got to be God, right? And and especially when it happens like multiple times in a row.
Yeah.
Like I had two Christian doctors who were like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "I guess not." Like that was for me like a
Thought
thing
I
where I'm
was.
like, okay, yeah, okay, maybe God is trying to lead me, and I should just slow down and listen. And yeah. So, but with the gaming thing, yeah, that was another area where I just had people who were like, why don't you do board games? Like, what do you mean do board games? Like, why don't you make board games? I don't know. Can you do that? And had a friend who just challenged me to do it. I'm like, okay. So I made a board game, and he's like, that's good. You should do it. I'm like, you should sell it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Wow.
So I just kind of like, I've tried to, like, as I pray about things, also listen to people.
Yeah.
Like, I think when I was younger, I would just sit around and wait for God to tell me, and God would be telling me, and I'd just be like, can you tell me more?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm just kind of like, okay, I prayed about it. I'm hearing this. Like, I should follow that.
So tell me about your first game. So you know you want to start a board game company. What's the first game you start working on?
So I started working on a game that was called New Kingdom, and it was like a discipleship journey type game, sort of like Pilgrim's Progress-esque, like an allegory where you're like kind of battling against temptations and blessings and stuff. And it was like a deck building game, and it was super long, and it was like just way complicated, and people were like, yeah, no, this is cool. And that was the one where people were like, yeah, no, you definitely have some like skill here. Why don't you apply it and like learn more? And I was like, oh, okay. And that game slowly morphed into a more accessible game called New Kingdom Gardeners, where I just was like, I was looking at the board game market, and I was like, I think I played Wingspan a lot with my wife, and was like, people are like into playing games like this. Like, why don't I try like, instead of the deck building thing, why don't I try tableau building, sort of like what this game is doing? And so I just kind of started off thinking like, Wingspan's popular, I'll do what Wingspan is doing. And so I played more tableau building games, and kind of got into that mindset. I was like, yeah, this is cool. This is like a little bit more accessible and like easier mechanically. And I was like, I need to like seriously reduce this game. It needs to play faster. It needs to be easier. And so I just kind of whittled it down until I got to a place where I'm like, okay, I've got something cool here, and I can use, like, I can see how I can work some of the like some of the like spiritual mechanics, like concepts that I was working on in my prior game into this. And then I started working with an artist who I knew from Young Life. We had like led together, and she was very talented. And she was like, what's like the theme of this game really? Like, what's like the style? What are we going for and stuff? And we were just brainstorming, and I was like, what if it's gardening? Like, that's all over the Bible. It's like the metaphor, like God is the like Mary thinks Jesus is the gardener, I was like, oh, that's what we'll do. It'll be a master gardener. That's the like God character. And I'm like, yeah, and you're a gardener. That's what you're doing. You're like learning to do what he does. And then she's like, oh, I love that. That's so cool. Like, she started working on little character illustrations. I'm like, oh, cool. And once that clicked together, it's like, okay, then the mechanics started to roll, and we started to really refine things.
Nice.
So I started working on that game, New Kingdom. I changed that into the name of the business, and
Hmm.
then started working on New Kingdom Gardeners. And initially, actually, I forgot a step. I created a like card game. It was just a like 52 card deck card game because
Okay.
the feedback I was getting was like, this is long
Mm-hmm.
and you need something more accessible, and like
Mm-hmm.
crowdfunding, like you like with an audience, you want to like be broad and stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'll just do like an easy card game. And I wasn't satisfied with it. I was like, this is okay. This is like not what I want to put out there. I want to put out something a little bit more than that. So I scrapped that project and kind of melded those two things into Gardeners, and that was the first thing that I crowdfunded and published.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what was the timeline from starting working on your first game to getting it published?
Well, I spent um, this was another like this was a Holy Spirit sort of thing where I was praying about this, and I was like talking with my wife about it. And it's like how much space in my life should I allow this business to occupy?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I have other things going on. And we were like starting a family and stuff, and the thing that Lindsay and I both like landed on was like 3 years.
Okay.
I was like, okay, this just seems like good. It was January of 2020. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, it was January of 2020. So then like 3 years later was January of 2023, and it's like this game is done. And I launched it on Kickstarter and funded. I'm like, oh,
Nice.
great. Like it just felt like the time. Spent 2 years developing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like 2 years of like just working on game design, learning, listening to a lot of like Board Game Design Lab, like connecting with people. Went to CGDC, started connecting with people through there. Like there's a local guy named Scott Jacobson in Idaho,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
who's like close to me. And he was like, do you know who Andrew Lowen is? And I'm like, nope, never heard of him. And he's like, yeah, he's doing big things in the like board game space for Christians. And I saw his Kickstarter project. I'm like, whoa, this guy's succeeding,
Yeah.
doing the thing I want to do. So I reached out to him and I'm like, hey, would you be interested in chatting with a young designer? And Andrew's like, yeah, of course. And we like became friends and started chatting about things. And Andrew has been super supportive and helpful. And he kind of pointed me in the right direction. He's like, have you ever heard of the Board Game Design Lab? And I'm like, no. And he's like, listen to all of those podcasts. And I started listening to Gabe. And most recently, I've been coaching with Gabe. Like I meet with him on a monthly basis and we talk about publishing. And that's been super helpful for me. Gabe is really like invested and invested time into me. And I'm super grateful for that. But it's just been fun to like connect with Christians in the space and see like, okay, there's an opportunity here. There's a community. There's like support. It's not just going it alone.
Yeah.
Trying to do something crazy or something like that.
So what's the vision for your company?
So the vision is the mission statement for New Kingdom Gaming is to create biblically inspired games for friends and followers. And the idea is like my market segments for New Kingdom Gaming are like a Venn diagram. Like here, the thing that I'm looking at is like, I want to appeal to Christian families and create games that can fit for Christian families who they may be interested in games, maybe not, like maybe they'll pull more towards games, but I want to try to catch people who are like, they could be interested in board games or like they're kind of into like Scrabble and stuff. Maybe they'll do a little bit more with games. And then on the other side is the thematic gamer. Like this is a person who's just like interested in doing something where like theme and mechanics are very tightly wound and like they want an immersive experience, but they don't care necessarily what the theme is. And like the outer edge of that is like antagonistic to Christian theme. Like these people are not antagonistic. They're like open. Like they're like, okay, I mean, you know, it's biblically themed. Let's see if it's good, you know? Like those are the two outsides of the Venn diagram, and the intersection is the Christian gamer. This is like a person who's like like a committed tabletop hobbyist and a devout follower of Christ. And like that's the core, like the core audience that like I hope will be interested in anything that we do. But the outsides, it's like maybe I can pull people from these other two directions into a center. And Brock, I'm good on time, so we can go longer if you want.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I got a few more questions.
Cool.
So I'm curious, what's God been teaching you through this process of designing games?
A lot. A lot of things. There's one principle that I've really been learning as an adult that I'm really trying to embrace and understand. And it was there's a popular pastor in America. His name is Craig Groeschel from a church called Life Church. I saw a sermon by him where he's talking about a principle called GETMO. It's good enough to move on. It's and he's talking about diminishing returns, where he's like, you can spend forever trying to get something from 95% to 100%. But the time that you spend there will be equivalent to the time that you spent to get it from 0 to 80%.
Yep.
He's like, then there's a little bit more that gets it from like 80 to 95%. And the question is, where do you stop? Sometimes when a thing is at 80%, that's good enough to move on. Sometimes when it's 95%, you have to say this is good enough to move on, because you can't spend that extra, all of the same amount of time you took to get it to 95% to get it from 95 to 100. Yeah. So you just can't. Like your sermon prepping, like if you're trying to prep perfect sermons, you'll never be available to minister to people.
Yeah.
You'll be stuck in an office poring over your commentaries, and your life will be prepping sermons and delivering them. And he's like, that's not biblical ministry. Like that's not what a pastor should be doing. You know, you go in your office, you prepare your sermon, it's good enough. And at some point you just got to stop. And like that was so convicting to me, because I grew up with this like perfectionist mindset.
Sure.
And that was like, that was like the focus. It was like, things must be right, perfect. And, Boris and I started to adopt that for church, where it's like, we got to GETMO. We're never going to get things done if we don't GETMO. So we started GETMOing, and that was like a big learning for me, where I'm like, okay, if I want things to move forward, I've got to just move through them, you know? Yeah. And, then balancing that with the call in Colossians, like do things excellently as unto the Lord, right? Like, so there's this tension and balance, and it's something that I've been trying to figure out. And like game design very much lives in that space. Like if you have perfectionist tendencies, nothing will ever get published.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, look at some of the best games of all time. Like I was recently reading reviews for Majora's Mask. It's like one of the Zelda games. Yeah. Because my friend is playing it on an emulator, and he's like, Majora's Mask is amazing. It's got all of these like concepts and like stuff like that. Yep. I was reading reviews of it, and it is very split. Like some people say like, this is a work of art. This is the best thing that was ever created in media, you know? And some people are like, this game is boring and terrible. You're like, what? Like, this is, you know, it's like, if you want everybody to love you, you'll never do anything. And one of the things that really has impressed on me in ministry is how often Jesus moves on. Like he's just like, okay, I like healed some people here, and now I'm leaving. And the people are like, but there's more sick people. And he's like, yeah, I know. I need to do my Father's will. It's like, and your Father's will isn't healing everybody. Nope. Something else.
Yeah, he was very on point about what he was here to do. So not only is there what you're talking about, the diminishing returns, there's also, I learned in college through like drawing classes and stuff, there's also a point where you start overworking something and it actually starts becoming worse as well.
Yeah, I recently saw this. So my friend sent me this reel on Instagram where a guy was talking about like a pottery class, and it's like in one pottery class, the assignment was to make the most total quantity of clay pots in the semester, and in the other, the assignment was to make one perfect clay pot. And the class that was assigned the quantity thing actually ended up doing better quality than the one that was like focused on one clay pot. And that's another thing that I've been learning about business and publishing is like, there is something to volume. Like if you can do like with game design, like the way that I have become more proficient in designing and playtesting is doing more of it. Yep. It's not necessarily like, you know, sitting down and perfecting a single game. It's like going to play tests and being like, let's play this weird game. Oh, that's no good. Okay. Like, let's play this weird game. Like, oh, that's great. That's cool. Let's work on that. And yeah. So just like figuring out how to like put things out there. I think I've seen that in ministry too. Like, man, I have preached at this point. I've brought like several hundred sermons, you know, and I remember reading this quote by like, I don't know, I can't remember if it was John or Charles Wesley in college. I think it was one of them though. I think it was one of the founders of Methodism. But they were talking about, the quote was something like, your first 10,000 sermons will be rubbish or something like that. Yeah. Like 10,000 sermons. Like how, like mathematically you preach 52 a year, like you would never get to 10,000, you know, unless you're an itinerant horseback preacher like these guys were. And I think like, man, that's crazy. You got to like preach more. You got to figure out how to not just be preaching on Sunday, and you got to do it a lot. And so like one of my rules is like if I'm asked to do a wedding, just always say yes. You know, because like, oh, you're doing the thing that God wants you to do. Like gather in union. Like if you're willing to like go through some counseling, have a Christian do it, and like you're going to bring together like believers and non-believers into a space where they can, you know, hear a gospel message. Like, okay. Like anytime people ask me to speak, I'm just like, okay, yeah, well, I'll speak. Cause like, who knows? Like that could be an opportunity for the seed of the gospel to sprout.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some tips for people that are just getting started? Sounds like that podcast that you said, the Game Design Lab.
Yeah, Board Game Design Lab. Yeah, okay. So if you, well, just getting started. Like if you're just getting started in game design, or if you're just getting started in anything, spend some time getting to know yourself. There are some great tools for that, but I would really encourage prayer in that direction. Self-awareness has been like the biggest piece of discipleship for me. It's revealed like my sinful areas and like helped me to improve through those things. And it's revealed my gifts and like helped me to be confident in embracing those things. But I think like doing intentional practice and self-awareness is really huge. Like read scripture and look for the things that pierce your heart. Because in scripture, there will be things that like pierce you, Brock, that don't pierce me, you know?
Sure.
You're just like, whoa, that like gets to something in me. You're like, when you encounter those things, like sit with them and pray about them. Like really consider like, how is God speaking to me? And ask others, like ask your friends and ask the Christians around you. Like, what do you see in me? Like, what are, you know, like get to those pieces about like, you know, we're talking about pottery, like God is the potter. Like, what has he formed us? Like, what kind of vessel has he made you to be? Are you like a pitcher? Do you pour out? Are you like a vase? Do you hold things together? Like, do you make them look beautiful? Like what's your function? I would say like, no matter what you're doing, like find some time to do that work. But then, yeah, if you're like, hey, I want to do game design, definitely I would suggest listening to the Christians in the space who are creating content. The big ones in board games are Gabe Barrett on the Board Game Design Lab. And then the other one is Andrew Lowen on Crowdfunding Nerds. So like, I would suggest the podcast Board Game Design Lab if you want to be a designer. You want to learn how to do that and start from the beginning. Like that, there's hundreds of episodes. Wow. But in the beginning, Gabe was really focused on trying to learn to be a designer. And he was interviewing all of the best game designers about how to design. And then as he went, it kind of developed into more like business and publishing and stuff like that. So there's some great content there. But then if you're interested in doing a business, like you want to publish other designers or you want to sell games, you want to market, Andrew Lowen is the person to listen to. Crowdfunding Nerds. They have a podcast as well. And that's for passive learning. I think podcasts are great because you can just plug it in and cut cards, like do your thing, whatever. You can like put your kids to bed, then just sit there for 30 minutes, listen to a podcast, then go to bed. You can do it while you're driving, while you're running, while you're working out, whatever. I'm a big fan of the podcast for that. I think it's a great medium for learning.
Me too.
Yeah. Those are the two biggest suggestions I have for like learning to do it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is like just not being fearful of putting stuff out into the world. Like, if you've designed a game, play it, like give it to other people to play it. Like if you designed a video game and you're like, I don't know if this is good, like show it to a friend, be like, is this good? And have them be like, oh, like your pixel art is cool. I like this element, like change this element. Okay. I think the other thing that, I think one of the things that I learned prior to doing board game design that has served me well in board game design is, and this is something that like when I was working in business, it was one of the things I realized like, oh, that's because of Christ in me. And I started to proclaim that is I just took feedback well. Like I would mess up because you make mistakes. Yeah. And, I'd get like chastised for it or something. Like my boss would be like, why did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't mean to. It was a mistake. I'm sorry. And he's like, oh, okay. and he was like, I don't know. People would be like, why are you so good at taking feedback? Be like, I don't know. Cause I know I'm not perfect. I'm a sinful, broken vessel and God is using me. So I think I can always improve. Like, God has a vision of perfection and I'm not that. And he's calling me towards that. So, and people would just be like, whoa, that's a totally different perspective. Like, why are you not getting defensive? Like, why should I be defensive? Like, yeah, but you're helping me improve. Thank you for giving me sharp feedback, Yeah. And that's been really helpful in board game design. Like people are like, this is terrible. I'm like, wow. Yeah, it probably is, huh? What should we do about that?
One last question. Jack, what does it mean for you to be a Christian game designer?
Well, I think there are other, I think it means the same thing as being a Christian anything. It just means that you, like, your primary goal in life is not the second thing. Right? So if you're a Christian accountant, your goal is not accounting. If you're a Christian sound engineer, like your goal is not sound engineering. Your goal is to be a Christian. Like your primary calling is the first thing. And like that thing will never change. Like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Exhibit those things. Build those things. Go about the second thing with those things. That's what it means to me. Now, like, do you create Christian content? If you do it with excellence. Do you create non-Christian, like not explicitly Christian content? Create that content in a way that exhibits those fruits that are connected with our calling, our upward calling in Christ. Like to me, that's what it means to be a Christian game designer. Is like, I'm going to design games with my creator in mind. I want to like emphasize his beauty. Like I want people to know his goodness. I want people to experience his mercy, like those kind of things. Like, can you work that into your craft? Because if you can, it will be distinctly different than anything the world does.
That's really good, Jack. Thank you.
Yeah. I had an example of that this week, actually. Yeah. That was accounting related. I had a guy who was like, man, I I just can't afford you guys anymore. I'm going to have to switch to a different service, you know. I'm like, okay. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, great. We'll help. Like, we'll help you with that. Like, I want to see you succeed. And if 100% got your back, and we'll do whatever you need. And he was like astonished by that response. And I'm like, that's because like my focus isn't retaining clients forever and building an accounting empire. My focus is on being a Christian first. And like for that, I have to have open hands with everything else.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah.
So if people want to find out more about your games and your company, where should they go?
So newkingdomgaming.com. Find me, like just look up Jack Dunbar. I'm on Facebook. Facebook is a great place to connect with me. You know, I'm a millennial, so like I'm more there than TikTok. I think I have a TikTok, and like I go on it sometimes, but not really.
You
I
don't
have
dance
like
or
I have
anything?
Instagram. What's that?
You're not on there dancing or anything?
No, I haven't done any viral dance trends yet. I deleted them all. No, I have an Instagram account too, New Kingdom Game. Also, I'm on there as Jack W. Dunbar, so you can find me there. And then you can just email me. It's jack@newkingdomgaming.com if anybody wants to connect. I love sitting with people. Like I've been trying to be very intentional about my game design work week. It's like 7 to 9 a.m. on PST, and then I work on Wednesday nights on it. And then the rest of my time is dedicated to my full-time job. So,
Well, Jack, I've really enjoyed this time. I'm glad we finally got to connect and get to know each other a little better.
me too, Brock. Thanks for asking questions, and I would love to return the favor sometime. We should probably grab coffee and talk
Yeah,
about
I'd
your
love to.
life.
I hope you can make it this summer to CGDC.
I'm going to, yeah, I need to talk it over with my wife and look at my summer schedule, and I'm hoping to go. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, brother.
Yeah. Thank you, Brock. I'll talk to you later.